Folks, we are joined by a very, very special guest. She's on the line right now. I consider it to be an honor to consider herself a friend of mine, and she's even willing to admit in certain public forums that she's also a friend of mine, which makes it all the more amazing. I'm speaking, of course, none other than Jayne Walsh. She was elected this past term to be a state representative from District 3 here in Providence, generally regarded as the Smith Hill District. She's become a provocative voice for civil rights and civil justice here in the state of Rhode Island. Her bona fides are clear. She's been active with groups like Jobs for Justice, taking, as we like to say at the coalition, taking things personally. She's been on a mission for a couple of years, not the type of mission we talked about earlier in the show where someone sits at a keyboard and types all sorts of provocative things about people that they'll never meet and really provides no real-time support or commitment to it. No, Moira takes it personally, is involved in it on a day-to-day basis. That's why, despite the fact that her and I can agree on some issues and politely disagree on others, that's why she's one of the heroes of the coalition. That's why she takes it personally, and that's why I'm proud again to have her on the show. Moira, welcome back to the coalition.
You make me sound so much cooler than I am, Pat, and I love it.
And of course, I've got to ask you, where is the tiny human tonight?
He's in the other room so far, being quiet. We will see how long that lasts. But thank you so much for having me back on.
Right. You know, when we get a chance to talk, and it's not nearly frequently enough, this is the type of thing, if we lived in the same neighborhoods, you and I would probably be down at the same coffee shop, biatching and moaning about the same things on a daily basis. It's been a pretty interesting first session for you, hasn't it?
It certainly has. It certainly has.
Let's get to the issues. Now, for folks who might still be listening from our last segment, who are hanging on to see what we're all about, Rhode Island is in the midst of what would be the term? I think it's called budget imbroglio, where you've got a standoff occurring between, we are a bicameral legislature, we've got a House of Representatives and a Senate, and traditionally it's been the role of the House of Representatives to generate a budget in cooperation at some level with our governor, which then of course has to be passed on by our Senate. Now, as has happened in the past, our Senate, and this is without, clearly there is a history to this. On occasion, our Senate has objected and returned said budget to the House of Representatives, where it is then regurgitated. The sausage is made usually in the wee hours of the evening amongst the proverbial, if not rhetorical, smoke-filled rooms. This was a year that a lot of people spent a lot of time crafting, refining legislation that had been in some cases in the process for years, was on the verge of passing, and whether you agree or disagree with the legislation, the entire process has been brought to a grinding halt before deliberative bodies could in fact execute their governmental responsibilities. What's your sense? What's going on up there?
Very simply put, people forget who they work for. Mm-hmm. We don't work for the state house. We don't work for the Senate president or the speaker or the governor. We work for the people of Rhode Island. And regardless of whose side you fall on in this argument, it is abundantly clear that the people of Rhode Island do not win in this scenario. Mm-hmm. And that's really disappointing, because when you look to leadership, you're looking for a leader. You're not looking for somebody who's going to passively sit by and watch bad legislation pass in favor of, going with the flow. And you're certainly not looking for somebody who's going to stall all legislation in a very clear move of cutting their nose off to spite their face. I'm disappointed. I'm really disappointed because I think I just beat out the youngest, and now I am the youngest representative in the House of Representatives, and this to me feels immature and childish, and I'm disappointed. I'm really disappointed. I want to go back to work.
Right.
I want to go back to work and finish the budget and finish the bills that we promised people that we were going to pass to make their lives better. I'm terribly disappointed. I mean, and I know that that's not, I'm sure, what constituents or voters or just Rhode Islanders in general are looking to hear, but that is the way it works when all of the power is funneled into, just a couple of people.
Mm-hmm. I've been following the events up there now for 20 plus years. I personally, and I could be wrong and I'm subject to challenging this, I can't remember a year when so many different groups had gotten involved on such an organic level. Again, legislation that I like, legislation that I might not approve of, but ultimately had crafted in conjunction with a variety of stakeholders in that respective issue and worked so closely with certain legislators to bring bills past the dreaded for further study status and actually bring them onto the House and Senate floors, where merely the difference between them being enacted and brought to the governor for signature or not was whether or not they'd achieved reconciliation. I can't remember a time.
It's shameful.
Yeah.
It's shameful, Pat. It's clear that we have forgotten who we work for. I say we. I just got there.
Right.
I haven't forgotten yet, and you made me a promise when I first won my election that you would never let me, and I expect you to hold to that. But I think that it's a trend to ignore the will of the people so frequently that they really don't realize that this time is different. They think that we're all just going to go back to sitting down and, as you said, complaining via keyboard. The people have proven since, this most recent election that that's not the case, and that they are not going to slow down, and they're not going to tire out, and they're not going to stop until they're heard. And it's disappointing that they have to work this hard, because it's literally our job to listen to these people. So it's disappointing that they have to, rally at the State House and fight this hard for legislation that should be common sense. But it's also really heartening to see, because particularly in my primary, voter turnout was really low. And you could really tell that, we had been telling people for a long enough time that their vote didn't matter, that they started to believe us. Mm-hmm. And I'm disappointed that this is what it takes to get people involved, sheer pants-crapping terror in terms of the national scene. But at least people are engaged. And if you know anything about getting involved in politics, it's that disappointment is like a daily thing. And you just pick yourself up the next day and dust yourself off and try it again and try it again and try it again. Mm-hmm. And it never feels worth it till it's done.
Right.
But this could very well be the reckoning. This could be that people of Rhode Island stop looking to the national front to change things and start looking to their local legislature. I was thrilled with how many people came up to my desk and lobbied me this session. I make it a point to come, early so that I can talk to people and see what they're about and who I'm getting the most contact from and what the most important bills are to them. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we need to stay in touch with. It's not just about, being in the newspaper and having your mug all over the internet. It's about making a real connection with the people in your community and not just listening to their problems, but proving that your priorities are their priorities. Mm-hmm. I had a whole list of things that I thought that my neighborhood wanted. I had a whole list, and it boiled down to just one: bus passes. Right. Bus passes. That's all they needed was bus passes. That's all anybody talked about was bus passes. And that, you know, it wasn't on my list. It was, I mean, it was, but it wasn't as high a priority as I thought. And that's what I dedicated my time to. Would it have been more fun to do, you know, big banner items that get a lot of, you know, flashing bulbs? Sure, I guess, but that's not the point of my job, is it? The point of my job is to serve the people who elected me. And the one thing that I really learned this session was that the votes are the only thing that matter. They're the only thing that matter. If you put in no legislation, those votes are what prove that you're still doing this for the right reasons. And I would love for somebody to just take a look at how democratic their Democrats were, because it'll surprise you a lot of the time. And I figured out really quickly that I was going to vote so that I could sleep at night and so that I could look my neighbors in the eye. And that, so far, has never been a problem for me. I vote no on a lot of bills. I vote no on bad bills. Kind of a habit of mine. And it may not make me popular with the higher ups. I definitely didn't get any legislation with my, you know, me as the sponsor passed. But that's, again, that's not why we do this. We do this to take care of our community because they're trusting us to. And there's nothing more disappointing than watching that clearly not be the case. No, you know, there's no world in which you can say this is in Rhode Island's best interest, because it's not. And I mean, the governor has the authority to call us back if she decides to intervene. But if nobody's going to be a leader, you know, then you can't follow. You got to lead yourself. So
you mentioned very clearly, and you are correct, your first responsibility is to the folks of the 3rd District of the House of Representatives of the General Assembly. First and foremost, that's, you know, yes, you have a responsibility to the state, but you are beholden, if you will, to the personal interests of the, I'll say the community interests, if you will, better choice of words, of the folks of the 3rd District. When I ask this question, it's not from the perspective of the job you did, but what kind of job did Rhode Island General Assembly do during this session on behalf of the people of the 3rd District? Were they well served or poorly served?
My neighbors got really hurt. My neighbors are going to be really hurt by a lot of policies this year. And it's, you know, from the routine attacks on the poor, like the downtown smoking ban and the increase in cigarette tax, which is literally just a message that says you can smoke if you're rich. If your after work routine involves, you know, sitting down at Blake's bar and drinking a gin and tonic, you can have a cigarette. If your after work routine involves you sitting at Kennedy Plaza for 3 hours waiting for a bus, you can't have a cigarette. I guess you don't deserve one. Maybe you haven't earned it. Or maybe it's all Paolino's playground now. Who knows? But, you know, the basic attacks on the poor, the DCYF cuts, despite the fact that DCYF has not been doing exactly a bang-up job in the last 26 months. And in particular, and this one isn't necessarily just geared towards my community, but towards Rhode Island in general. I don't know really anybody that doesn't have a prescription. That prescription bill really, really concerns me. Looking into people's prescription histories without a search warrant is a really dangerous game, and I'm really disappointed that more people didn't see how appalling that was. That's a very scary bill. And I hope the governor vetoes it, but that's a hope. Nothing is certain anymore.
Do you, and I want you to tell us a little bit more about that legislation, but would you, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, are you essentially calling on Gina Raimondo on behalf of the people of your district to veto that bill?
I wish she would.
Okay.
It's just a bad piece of legislation. The gist of it is the Attorney General, the DEA, and the FBI are all allowed to look into the prescription database, the one that already exists in Rhode Island, without a search warrant. Now, they already have the authority to do that with a search warrant, but they now want the authority to do it without a search warrant. And we're told it's to stop the pill mills and the opioid crisis.
Right.
Even opioid wellness centers are against it. Every doctor on the planet is against it. I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to say generalizations anymore. Many doctors in Rhode Island are against it. There we are. For me, the most frightening part is that medical marijuana is in that database. And medical marijuana is legal in the state of Rhode Island, but federally it is still illegal. So does that mean that our Attorney General can start giving up cancer patients to Jeff Sessions? Because we gave him the authority to, we're just hoping that he's not done, right? We're hoping that we have an Attorney General who's like a really good guy, who's not going to abuse that power, right? Because Rhode Island has such a history of public servants with hearts of gold. I don't know if you're aware of that. It's like what we're known for. So that really concerns me. It really concerns me. And I think it's going to have a chilling effect on the medical marijuana program in general. I think doctors are going to be terrified to prescribe marijuana to patients because they're afraid that the DEA is going to come knocking on their door. I think it's a vast overreach of government. And again, I'm really appalled that in a House that's, majority Democrats, that bill didn't die on the floor. That really surprised me. Because it's a bad bill. And good people put in bad legislation all the time. It doesn't mean they're bad people. Sometimes, you're too close to the trees to see the forest, as it were. And I know that this opioid epidemic is really scaring people, especially people in communities that are new to this epidemic. You know what I mean? Communities like mine have seen epidemics and understands that criminalizing addiction does nothing to slow the spread of addiction.
Right.
And I think we all know that the FBI, the DEA, and the Attorney General aren't looking into our prescription histories for our health benefits.
No.
They just really care about our health. That must be what it is. And so there was a lot of there were a lot of surprises my first year, but I have to say I'm not surprised at my behavior. I knew that I was probably not going to be a green lighter.
Yeah, no,
And lo and behold, I was not a green lighter.
Let's look for a second at each of the, I'll call it in this case, the involved branches of government. Gina submits a budget that in many cases is dead on arrival. At what point in time do we insist on creating a more cooperative working relationship between the governor's office and the General Assembly? Because it strikes me that at this point that the governor's budget submissions are often nothing more than wishful thinking, flights of fancy, and political posturing, which have little or no chances of survival, whether it be for fiscal or legal reasons. And we have governors who cynically propose them anyway, really tying down the wheels of government in an effort to appease or to patronize certain constituencies. What has to be done there to eliminate this madness?
So I'm going to be honest, that does not concern me nearly as much as the fact that we don't follow our budget.
Okay.
What is the point of a budget
Right.
if you don't follow your budget?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, I am a low-income individual. I'm a single mom raising a toddler who eats like a garbage disposal. Okay? I spend 98% of my paycheck in a grocery store, and he eats it as we're walking up the stairs. All right? But I know that if I overspend on, say, supplies and expenses
Mm-hmm.
by 100%, by the way, those are real numbers from the
Right.
real supplies and expenses category of last fiscal year.
Mm-hmm.
Overspent by 100%, okay? I wouldn't have money for rent. Do you see? Because I have a finite amount of money.
Right.
So if I overspent by 100% in one category, I'm gonna have to cut it back in some other category. But that doesn't happen in our budget.
Right.
I made the very rookie mistake, I know, very rookie mistake, of reading the budget that they gave me.
Oh. Hey
know,
now.
I know. And it was last year's, they gave me last year's budget so I could get acquainted with the budget and learn how to read it appropriately and all that kind of stuff. And, for the last 5 or 6 fiscal years, we go over on paper clips. I don't know what falls under supplies and expenses. I haven't asked. But it's in a multitude of categories, The governor says, I want this much. And we say, you can only have this much. And she says, okay. And then she spends double that anyway. And we're no better. I mean, the legislature does the same thing. Again, as a lower income person, that's not how budgets work.
Right.
We need some accountability in there. Our Auditor General does an amazing job every year telling us what to fix to save money and close these, problematic money holes. And every year we go, great job, Auditor General, not happening. And on his report every year, he puts an asterisk next to the things that are repeat suggestions. And every year they're repeats. And I've only been there for one session so far, but I don't understand. As a person with a limited income, you have to budget, guys. Like, I don't get it. So that concerns me way more than the, miscommunications here and there, because it's good to have these checks and balances. It's good to have somebody who says, reach for the stars, give everybody college. And then, mean curmudgeon grandpa goes, you can't give anybody college, you can't do that. And then, nice grandma goes, okay, well, you can give some people college, and that's okay. That's good. It's good to have that communication. But again, none of that means anything if we're not following the budget. And that's the part that concerns me far more.
What are some of the aspects of the budget that you just find beyond the pale, that you find atrocious? Now, you mentioned Health and Human Services, or I should say DCYF. What are some of the other areas that you find outrage in?
The legislature. I mean, who ran an article the other day about, what is it, 40 million that the legislature gets to run?
Right.
Yeah, we're in for 6 months out of the year. That seems a little exorbitant now.
Well, if you're paying the head of the legislative, this guy Montanaro, $170,000 a year. I wasn't wondering. This is.
Does that come out of that budget, or is that a personnel budget? I don't know.
And that's probably.
I don't know that those are connected.
Right, but I mean, if you're paying a guy like that, I often wonder, would he have taken the job for $120,000? I'm thinking he might have. Just saying. But yeah, no, I mean, it's you've got this out of control spending on a legislature, all sorts of coat hangers type jobs, and some.
If we went paperless, it would solve like 90% of that waste.
Right.
You have no idea how much paper we go through in that building. Oh my goodness.
Right. But how much of that paper begets job opportunities for the politically connected? Third rail time.
Some paper salesman is really breaking the bank on this. Is that what you're telling me, Pat?
That, or the people who hand the paper, who shuffle the paper from one desk, apply the mythical, rhetorical rubber stamp, and then move it to the next desk without any value add whatsoever, or the seemingly endless supply of middle-level management types. You know, I routinely make the point on this show that I'm not after the guy who washes dishes at the hospital. I'm not after the guy who literally, you know, pushes snow. I'm not after the guy or the gal who's the aide at a nursing home. I'm not after them. I'm after the folks that seemingly can operate, you know, make money that has no relationship to the free market or to what similar jobs would be paid in the dreaded private sector. That's what makes me insane. The sheer level, you know, with and again, my comment, not yours, with Raimondo's administration, there seems to be no end to the amount of $150,000 glorified project managers or communications people that she wants to hire. There doesn't seem to be an issue with that. You know, yet again, bus passes. I've had the folks from RIPTA Riders. I've had the folks from a variety of, from the Pawtucket Soup Kitchen, from a variety of organizations who are facing, and I believe some of them are from, obviously, from the west and south end of Providence, who are literally facing, in the year 2017 in Providence, Rhode Island, issues revolving around malnutrition because they are incapable of getting to a place where people are willing to offer them a meal. How is that possible in the year 2017? You know,
That's a very good question. And I feel very similarly. Greed is not limited to politics. You know, it thrives there for sure, but it's not limited to politics. We have nonprofit organizers who make, you know, 3 figures a year, you know, $300,000 a year or so, and you know, are supposedly helping the poor. And like, I mean, I'm sure you are, but it would be a lot more helpful if you took a pay cut.
Right.
There are a lot of organizations that cry poor mouth. We discovered that during earned sick leave testimony. You know, when you know, business owners who can pay a mortgage and a car payment and go on vacation every year are saying that if they don't make their workers come in sick, they're going to have to close their doors forever. Like, I find that hard to believe. I find it hard to believe that that you can be financially stable enough to live a comfortable life, but your employees can't feed themselves, and you can't distribute some of that weight. So I agree with the exorbitant salaries, that there are definitely exorbitant salaries in the state house, but I think that there are exorbitant salaries in the private sector as well, that people would do well to remember that employees are people too.
Right. No, I understand where you're coming from. What's the solution even in the short term? I mean, we've got organizations like Rhode Island Commerce Corporation that see no end to the gravy train to whomever they're selected. They're you know, they can be patron to all, and there seems to be no boundaries being placed on that. Now, that budget was alleged to be cut. You know, or Speaker Mattiello had spoken to less of a contribution to the Commerce Corporation. In the current status, my understanding, and please, you're the feet on the street. How are they going to continue the level funding from 2017, where they can just give loans out to whoever they deem fit?
We're supposed to be continuing from last fiscal year,
216, 217,
on a quarterly basis until the budget issue is solved.
Mm-hmm.
Now, up to the speaker, it's not going to be solved until January when we reconvene. So I imagine that means we go back to former level. I don't know. We know very little at this point.
We're in largely uncharted territory, aren't we?
Again, really cutting our noses off to spite our faces here. We're like down to eyebrows.
So you're ready to go back to work right away, aren't you?
Yes, I want to go back today, honestly. Like, there are important pieces of legislation that are tied up in this team contest, essentially. Like, this is not how politics is supposed to work. We look at this on the national stage and we laugh and we say, wow, look at those buffoons. And then we're going to do it on a state level. Like, no, it's disgraceful. It's disgraceful. I want to be back to work now. I want to be back to work yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Regenberg, the representative from the East Side, has called for that, hasn't he?
Yes, I believe he has. So as Representative Lauren Carson has said that she wants to get back to work. I'm sure there are a couple others, but I'm not going to remember their names.
Not to be silly for a second, but what happens if you all start showing up? If folks like for example, on let's just say on Monday morning, or Monday afternoon, what do they call it? The rise of the House. What happens if a few of you folks just start showing up and chatting? Are they gonna block you at the door? Can that be done?
I mean, I don't imagine that they would, but I also don't imagine that there are. I don't know. I don't know that. I don't know who wants to go back and who doesn't. I'm not
Right.
going to speak for people.
Understood.
Who aren't here to speak for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that it's enough to just publicly say, yes, I want to go back to work. I think we have to acknowledge what happens here.
Mm-hmm.
That there was a direct failure on our part as a legislature to do our job.
Right.
And again, it's easy to be a mouthpiece. It's harder to put action to those words, and that's what I'm hoping and expecting that a lot more of my colleagues are going to do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want this to happen again.
Mm-hmm.
This is really, this is not what I want my constituents to remember about this term.
Right.
I wanted them to remember all the really awesome victories that we had, and not that we threw all of them away for a 2-paragraph budget amendment that doesn't affect anything.
Mm-hmm.
What a bummer.
Right.
What a bummer.
What is the status right now? And this is what's confusing to so many, because you have a couple of different issues here. You had legislation that was effectively incorporated into the budget, and that is obviously a non-starter right now. Then you've got legislation that was passed by both houses, yet because a reconciliation hadn't taken place, is in this sort of legislative limbo right now. The money to restore service for the low-cost ride program for the folks at RIPTA, what is actually the status of that now? Is that caught up in this madness?
I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. Theoretically it should be, but I also don't know that RIPTA riders are being charged right now, so I don't know if that's something that RIPTA is doing out of the goodness of their hearts, or if there's been money allotted. But if you recall, in last year's budget, we did have money for the riders up until a point.
Right.
So it may well be that we're working off of that.
I know that RIPTA did. I did a little story a few weeks ago. Didn't get a lot of notice because it was surrounded by all the budget sturm and drang, and quite frankly, the dollar amounts weren't huge. But for the record, folks, RIPTA is using Clean Air Act money to fund free bus rides to go visit your Pawtucket Red Sox, and because God knows that's critical, and also the government has found the funds to give free rides for people from the suburbs on the failed South County extension of the T to get people up to Providence. So
I'm glad we're doing something with it other than it collecting dust.
Yeah. What I find astonishing is the disconnect when services are offered in support of political agendas and or, in the case of the PawSox, private companies. Somehow we always manage to find the money for that, yet when there are people at risk, and make no bones about it, as a libertarian, I hope we evolve into a nation where, folks are financially strong enough not to be dependent on these programs. But in the interim, where we've got folks who are facing serious depredation because they don't have access to services, that seemingly this nonsensical notion that we need to subsidize PawSox games or we need to subsidize vacationers to go to Newport on a ferry service while we struggle emotionally with the ability to provide basic survival tools to folks who are the poorest and the most suffering amongst us. For lack of a better term, and forgive me for using this, but the political schizophrenia that exists, particularly coming out of the governor's office in that respect, is, I find, frankly, to be disgusting. On one level.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I was definitely a little confused that we were cutting money from DCYF to give kids free college,
right,
because they're not going to make it to college if we keep cutting money from DCYF.
Right.
Under, as much as I was not a huge fan of Governor Chafee, under Governor Chafee's administration, 3 kids total died in DCYF custody. In the 26 months that we've been working on this, it's up to 11. And so to then still want to cut money from that budget, yes, it's evil. It's unconscionable.
I
mean, maybe that's the wrong con. Maybe that's the wrong con. Let kids less college tuition and pay for it. That's awfully cynical.
But and these are my words, not yours. I've been saying a lot of that tonight. But I truly believe when you have a governor who has no functional soul, that those cuts in the abstract are very simple to make. If one furthers the political goal and the other doesn't, well, who wins? You've got a chief executive of the state who is clearly moist finger clearly in the wind, looking for the direction to go on everything from the continuing atrocities at UHIP to her continuing mixed message about inventor and the heart-wrenching implications of it at DCYF, to her willingness to quasi-support, depending on who you talk to, the position of the Sun and whether the Red Sox won or not, the willingness to put money at stake to build a private baseball stadium for a bunch of billionaires. Wow. Again, I was no fan at the time of Governor Chafee, because he just seemed at times lost and misguided, and obsessive over the wrong things. I never actually contemplated using him and the word evil in the same sentence, because I find him to be a fundamentally decent man who just simply has different priorities and perspectives than I. I never questioned his base morality the way that I have to question this governor's. And one need only see the lines at UHIP last week. The lines at UHIP, the lines to go around the block in a hot summer day, months after those same lines were exhibited in the bitter cold, to understand that our priorities in terms of how they're actually executed at the governmental level in the state are hopelessly screwed. And again,
a lot of it as well is a perception problem. People don't trust the court.
Right.
If you need proof, look at the pro-Joe comment section and just see how the disdain and the vitriol that people have for low-income individuals. And so when you say things like, oh, you have crisis and DCYF, people's immediate assumption is, yeah, well, that's the poor folks. And
I wish that more people would be as outraged as you are about the corporate welfare that goes on in this state. Like, I see all the time, oh, if you have money to get your nails done, you don't need to be on food stamps, blah, blah, blah. Like, okay, well, if you have money to buy a yacht, you don't need a corporate tax break. It should go both ways. I don't understand why the hatred really only goes towards the poor. But I do know that it has direct implications on the speed and quality of the service that they receive. Because when you don't have the people behind you, when the people don't care about each other, what incentive is there for you to care?
Well, and to steal a couple of terms from people I greatly admire, there's a woman, I'm sure you know her, she's referred to on the streets as Mama Dreads. She talks about the war on the visibly poor. And there's also Dr. Peter Nightingale. There's a Dr. Peter Nightingale, who's a professor of physics at the University of Rhode Island, who talks about economic racism. That is, dropping these economic bombs like Invenergy or prisons amongst communities that are poor and either lack the resources to fight them or are given a line about what they'll do for their community, when in fact it's all fiction. When you see that repeatedly, and I'm going to use a term that I personally hate, but I'm going to apply it to the corporate cronies in this state, and I'm specifically talking about the POSIX ownership, the gentleman down here in Kennedy Square. If there are, in fact, welfare queens in this state, and I hate that term, they aren't the folks standing in line outside of DCYF, and they aren't the folks standing out in line as a result of the UHIP. By and large, they're folks who prey on an undereducated public who is often lied to and given false hope and false promises under the guise of economic development that they will pay for on a literal level, but have no chance whatsoever of deriving any sort of personal benefit from. And that applies to all of them. They're, in some cases, centimillionaires. In a handful of isolated cases, they're billionaires who repeatedly feed at the public trough. And the big lie, by the way, the big lie in government these days that's so often preached to some of my friends on the right is that by somehow supporting these people, that you in turn have an opportunity to become one. Well, folks, newsflash, you're not allowed in that club. And
they're going to totally help you up the ladder after them. That's
right.
Definitely how that works.
Right, that whole trickle down thing. Whereas,
yeah, you call me when that works out for you.
Yeah, I'll let you know, buddy. Hey, yeah, you and me both. Yeah, we're headed towards Easy Street. Fortunately, a lot of my friends on the right are waking up to the notion that these guys are in fact, and again, I use the term guardedly, welfare queens. And there is no bigger one than Larry Lucchino and the people heading up the Paw Sox. Whether it be $10,000 or $20,000 from the Clean Air Fund, so they can bus people to their stadium, or the millions that they've asked for. How else can you describe them? I mean, am I being unfair here?
No, you're not. And I agree. It's hard to look at your neighbors and say we can't afford bus passes for elderly and disabled people because we have to give money to a new city. Like I'm not going to do that. It doesn't have to be like that.
There's one version of this existing legislation for the Paw Sox to get this money from the Pawtucket Redevelopment Authority and the city of Pawtucket. And by the way, for the folks at the Pawtucket Redevelopment Authority, yes, by the way, you've gone over your 10 business day AFRA guideline or deadline when I asked you for the money that you spent on the stadium. Don't think I've forgotten about it. Got a little busy the last day or two planning the show, but you'll be hearing from me on Monday. They have all this money, and yet when I talk to people who live in Pawtucket, Hammond Eggers like you and me, Moira, all right, they constantly use the term civic pride, and we've only got a couple minutes left, but I'm going to pose this question to you. the folks of the 3rd District, I think, are a lot like the folks from a lot of the districts in Pawtucket. Is it fair to say that these people would have a lot more civic pride if when they dropped their children off to school in the morning, they weren't worried about crumbling ceilings or mold? Would they have a lot more civic pride if they weren't worried about their fire department being closed? Would they have a lot more civic pride, all right, if malls adjoining Newport Avenue and Armistice Boulevard weren't completely empty and they weren't driving routinely past boarded up homes? Do you think, what's going to give them more civic pride, Maura? Is it a goddamn stadium, or is it going to be actually a community that they're proud and that they're excited to go home to?
I had a boss who used to always say, you know, you can take care of the guy at the top for as long as you want, but you got to remember he's only going to buy one pillow. And that means that when you take care of the people in the community, they're going to put that back into the community.
Right.
When you take care of, you know, the multi-million-dollar business owner, he's only ever going to buy one pillow.
Mm-hmm.
But his employees, if they're taken care of, are going to keep your economy turning. And that's something that we need to pay attention to. You know, we made a very small adjustment in the minimum wage this year, which is good, but we're still way behind Massachusetts and Connecticut. We need to start taking care of the people towards the bottom, because the people at the top have gotten enough of our time, attention, and resources, and I think that they'll do just fine without them.
Yeah, you know, it's we've got a clear move in this town that I'm standing in right now, a clear desire, both from our governor and some of our civic leaders, to pursue policies which will gentrify communities for the profit of the connected. And I always leave with this question: who should a community serve? The people who've spent a lifetime, who have invested years of sweat equity into, or the people who would ostensibly parachute in, make a quick profit, and leave nothing but devastated lives behind them? Why does government need to support those who would do the latter as opposed to those who've given so much to do the former? It's kind of sad.
Preach, brother.
It's, as our president would say, sad! Exclamation point. Maura, I thank you for what you're doing. Again, folks, if you're tuning into this last minute, I've been on the line with Jayne Walsh. She is the duly elected representative for District 3, Smith Hill as it's called, in the city of Providence, for the General Assembly for the great state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. Maura, are we going to, you know, I know it's silly season, but do you anticipate perhaps participating in the, not just the session coming up, but in the sessions beginning in 2018? That's a really nice way of saying, are you in this for the long run? You're going to go for re-election? Too early to tell?
I will stay as long as it's what my neighbors want. Like, I don't have the authority to make that decision. Mm-hmm. I'll run as long as they want me to keep running. And, you know, if ever they want me to stop, I will. So I guess, yeah, I'm in it for the foreseeable future.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love it.
Let me say before I go,
yeah.
Because I heard in your intro that I sometimes say it, so I want to say it on the radio so it's clear that you and I are friends, and we are very good friends, and I call you for all of my big, important advice. But now there's a record of it.
Excellent, excellent. Well, again, I'm proud to call you a friend, and I think there's some sort of form you can register. It gives you a little badge, and you got to pay a little fee, and it gives you a little more access. I think the next session you're going to be seeing me a little bit more of me down on the House floor. So I'm going to take.
Oh, I so hope so. We could create such.
Because we are the odd couple, aren't we? I'm not sure.
It's like how confused all of my progressive friends get when I hang out with the Republicans on the floor. They're like, "What?
Yeah, they're funner than you.
And listen, no one puts a party like the into a party like the Libertarian
Right.
Party. So we're gonna be working very aggressively next year to get at least one or two of us to join you down there as well. So
Beautiful.
yeah.
Look forward to it, Pat. Thanks for having me. Have a good weekend.
Great, and thank you again, folks. Moira Jayne Walsh, she is a representative of District 3 of Providence, Rhode Island, Smith Hill for the General Assembly of the great state of Rhode Island and Providence.